We give ourselves to you and pray that we will walk in the way that you want us to go. Thanking you for this time and for your kindness and goodness. And it's in your son's precious name we do pray.
Nope. All right. Well, I was all ready to do a lesson on chapter 3 again, but I decided we ought to just talk about Dee's dream about Elvis.
Sorry,
Oh, she gave me that look when I woke up, like, you woke me up now? Yeah. Forget the coffee, give me Elvis there. Anyway. Well, you'll think of something cute later, right? Uh, all right, well, let me get our screens up here. Dreams are weird, really, they are. Yes. Yeah, I have some doozies sometimes. Yeah, I have some doozies of dreams. So, okay, well, so yeah, well, I kind of like this. I've got into this where we look at what I would maybe say that more the traditional way of looking at the chapters in Daniel and what is said there, but then also going back and looking at it more again from a different perspective, something that gives us a little more something to think about in our daily lives and what it means to us, and maybe is the real big message for the chapters. And we're going to do that again and in chapter 3, and really this one we call "Worship is War" is a title. But you remember last week we went over this image and how Nebuchadnezzar had put up this big statue of gold, and he decided it would be all gold because gold was his empire, the Babylonian Empire, and he didn't want to think about that being ended, and puts that up and insists on all the people to come in, all the leaders to come in and worship that image and bow down when they heard the orchestra going. And then the three Hebrew men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, said, "No, we are not going to." They stood up while everybody else didn't, bowed down for it, and they were cast into the fiery furnace. And surprise, surprise, there was they weren't harmed. Their bonds were burned off, but they weren't burned. And there was an extra guy in the furnace with them who probably was Jesus or an angel, but God's protection for them. And they weren't harmed. And Nebuchadnezzar was really surprised, called them out, brought them out, and he acknowledged the greatness of this God. He said, "You're God's." He said, "No other God, capital or lowercase g, no other God can save like the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." So Nebuchadnezzar learned a little bit more about God. In fact, then he decided that, well, I'm going to make a proclamation that nobody's going to talk bad about this God. And as if God needed Nebuchadnezzar's help on it. So that's kind of, we looked at that last week. But let's see, this week's lesson then in this chapter, it really focuses on worship. And I went and I found a list of things that when we worship something other than God, it's idolatry. And that's first and second commandment violation. And I've made a list here, and we've got all of these things that we would agree are idolatry, bowing down to images, worshiping images, sacrificing to images, worshiping other gods, swearing by other gods, walking after other gods, speaking in the name. And I'm thinking, I'm okay. I'm okay. Looking to other gods, yeah, I'm okay. Serving other gods, you go down the list, sacrifice and worship, whatever, and so forth. Worshiping dead men, we see that even worshiping devils, actually seeing more of that now. Setting up idols in the heart. And here we're starting getting a little bit closer to home for me. Covetousness, sensuality, pride, greed, possessions, and getting real personal now, worshiping anything else but God. So this thing, idolatry is making a good thing the ultimate thing. So anything that we hold up as more important than God can and does become an idol. Any degree, any thoughts on that?
So back in 2001, we lived in St. Charles, Missouri. And I had a 78 Corvette. And I loved that car. And I would polish it and I would work on it and I would do everything. One day I'm in the garage during the Olympics on all fours, the most important. And Anna Marie come out of the kitchen door to the garage. She said, "You worshiping that car again?" You know what? That shocked me.
I'm very religious.
And I sold that
I'm
car
very religious.
Uh-huh.
because I was afraid.
That's different.
And so I got really haven't looked back.
The most important thing in your life.
Thank for the right time.
Yeah.
So gentlemen, your pride and joy is your wife, not the fucking.
No sin.
All right. Hey, Bill, do you have a thought on that? There.
Oh, I just said, it's pretty obvious that the most important thing in their life for all good share of the athletes in the Olympics is not God.
Yeah. The center of their life is something altogether different.
Right. They devote their whole life. If that's the most important thing in their life, I would say that. I mean, there are some believers that are obvious about, but there's a lot of them that I think that they worship the recognition and the gold.
Yeah, I really like the testimony of that. I don't remember her name. She ran the 200-meter hurdles.
Right.
And she made a wonderful testimony that her.
Yeah, there are some that do.
Yeah. But there are other gods that we put up there as the power, position, or money, or prestige, or pride, that can become, or Corvettes, as Gary said. Yeah, I have to talk to my neighbor. He's got 2 Corvettes in his garage and he keeps them all covered. And if there's a piece of dust on them, well, he's out there polishing it. So Anna Marie needs to talk to him, Gary, I think. Anyway, let's watch what Shane has to say about this chapter and give us some things to think about.
I'm the dad of 4 kiddos. And one of the things, many things I've learned over the years from them, but one of the things I've really centered in on is that if my kid comes home or they come into the other room and they start repeating the same word over and over and over, they're probably kind of excited about it. They want me to somewhat pay attention to it. I mean, it's like my youngest not too long ago, he came home and he was talking about his new school and his new playground. And he was like, Dad, I was out on the playground at recess and I went down the slide and then went over and got my buddy and we went down the slide and I went back up the slide and I went down the slide. And so I was like, so you kind of like the slide. Like that's kind of, I can kind of get the point because he repeats it over and over and over. And the Bible is the same way. If in a small amount of space, the Bible repeats a word over and over and over, you might want to pay attention to it because that might be the key point of the text. In Daniel chapter 3, the first 15 verses, the word worship in English is repeated 9 times. 9 times, just over and over and over. It's like worship, 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 worship. So the point of Daniel 3 might have something to do with worship. When we dive right into the first verse, King Nebuchadnezzar, coming fresh off of this vision in Daniel 2 of this giant statue with the head of gold. Chapter 3, verse 1 says this, says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high, that's about 90 feet high, and 6 cubits wide, 9 feet wide. He makes this enormous image, probably based off of his dream. And then he decides to attach the image to worship. He sends out a decree that everyone is to worship this image. And if they don't, verse 6 tells us what happens. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. You see, in the first 15 verses, worship is repeated 9 times. Why? Because in the book of Daniel, worship is war. Let me say that again. In the book of Daniel, worship is war. It's where the battle is fought. It's where the enemy is targeting. It's what God expects for him. Because when we worship, we are pledging allegiance. When we worship, we are claiming an identity. When we worship, we are transforming into someone else. Worship is war. And Nebuchadnezzar at the beginning of chapter 3 draws the battle lines. It's wartime, and worship is the center of it. You see, in the ancient world, worship was a parasitic relationship. This mutually parasitic relationship where, you give me something that I want, and then I'll give you something that you want. All of the ancient deities, they had this bloodlust for sacrifice. If you give me sacrifices, then I will give you power, because that's what all the kings and all of the kingdoms were desiring. In the ancient world, you would have the deities that you're worshiping, the gods they're worshiping, that were latched onto you and demanding something from you, and you were doing the same. You were latched on to the deity. You were worshiping the deity because you were expecting something in return. Nebuchadnezzar is desiring power, prominence, and he's using his authority to get it. And the center of how he accomplishes all of this is through worship. And worship is something that the Israelites had struggled with for quite some time. Even though it was the first commandment in Exodus 20, that you shall have no other gods before me, that you worship me alone, because worship defines who you are. The nation of Israel struggled, compromising in their worship of other gods. And so at this moment, when Nebuchadnezzar puts up this statue, it wouldn't have been ridiculous for the nation of Israel to act like the way they have been acting. But the problem is that their bad worship practices led them into exile to begin with. And what we find is in Daniel chapter 3, verse 12, Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are willing to go to war over who they worship. In Daniel chapter 3, verse 12, it says this. There are some Jews, this is what the chief priests are tattling to Nebuchadnezzar about. There are some Jews whom you have set up over the affairs of the province of Babylon, O king, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. You have given them things, but they are not giving you worship in return. They are not agreeing to this parasitic relationship, and their worship reveals their true allegiance. Their worship reveals their true identity, because in the ancient world, in the book of Daniel, worship is war. And when Nebuchadnezzar heard that these three officials were defying his decree, he lost his mind. He became enraged, and he brings Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into his presence to confront them. He comes after them and he says, you either worship this statue or I will throw you into the fiery furnace. Here's the problem at this point. If you know how the story goes, you might miss the point. See, yes, as the story goes, they end up saying, we're not going to worship your statue. And Nebuchadnezzar gets really ticked, and he takes the furnace and makes it up really hot so that even when the people are trying to throw in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they die. And then whenever the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are in the fiery furnace, a fourth person appears, and Nebuchadnezzar's like, oh my goodness, they're walking around and they've not been hurt, and they come out unfazed. They come out unsinged. If you know how the story ends, you actually might miss the point of the story. Because the point of the story has very little to do with the rescue. The point of the fiery furnace is not that they worshiped God and were delivered from a fire. The point of the fiery furnace is that we worship God because of who he is, not because of what we get. You see, listen to how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego confront Nebuchadnezzar's demand to worship the statue. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, verse 16, replied to the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve, he is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But notice what they said there. He'll deliver us from you, even if it means we die. I mean, he could save us, but that's not the point. Verse 18. But even if he does not, we want you to know, even if he does not rescue us, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. You see, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are saying this. We do not worship God because of what we get. We worship God because of who he is. This isn't some parasitic relationship where we give him something and he gives us something, but we are mutually dependent. No. Even if we die in the furnace, it does not change our allegiance. It does not change our worship. It does not change who we are and who we belong to. Because worship is war. But a lot of the times, you will cash in this key weapon in the battle simply because you don't get your way. Listen, God is not a cosmic Santa Claus in the sky. And that's something we Christians need to come to terms with. He is not some God in the sky that if you do good things, then you get put on the good list and then you get good stuff. That you get all the health that you could possibly want or all the wealth. If this is your picture of God, don't be surprised that when you're in exile, you will not only be willing to compromise, but you will abandon. You will reject him and choose instead to worship another deity, declaring allegiance to another. You see, one of the things that's fascinating is that when they come out of the fiery furnace, Nebuchadnezzar's response tells us the point of this chapter. He says this, talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He says, they trusted in their God and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any God except their own God. And that was very paradigm shifting for him. Because notice how his worship was centered on what he gave them or did not give them. He says, but there's something deeper here with these Jews and their God, because they worship him because of who he is, not because of what they get. You see, in the book of Daniel, worship is war. Because worship defines who you are. Or let me even say it a different way. Because when you worship, you become someone different. Or another way we could say it is that who you worship, you become. You take on their traits. You take on their characteristics. You take on their mannerisms. You take on the way in which they think and the way in which they talk. You start to look like them the same way that children look like their father. Because in a very real sense, worship isn't just something that you do. It's something that's done to you. Because true worship is transformational. True worship is life-altering. True worship confronts and upheaves everything that is not God. And the uncomfortable truth about this about this whole discussion is this. Who you trust is who you worship. And so here's my question to you. Hey, Christians, who do you trust? Who do you trust? Do you trust only the ones that give you things, that give you the good things that you ask for? Do you only trust the laws of the land? Do you only trust your bank accounts? Do you only trust politicians or your vote? My goodness. I dread every 4 years in the church election season. It's always one of those moments where the way that we talk about the candidates that we love, sometimes I wonder if we remember who we are, if we remember our greatest weapon in this battle. Because the way that we talk about the other side, especially if our side loses, is almost as if everything has crumbled. Several years ago, I did something really stupid. The day after the election for Obama's second term, I went on Facebook. Why would you do that? Here's a rule of thumb. Stay away from all social media anytime there's an election. Listen, I wasn't upset at people being upset. I was upset with what Christians were saying and what it said to me about their worship and who they trust. There was one particular friend that I had that she actually was my Sunday school teacher whenever I was young. She taught me about Jesus. And her post confused me. She said, last night, whenever I heard the results of the election, I began to weep. She said, in fact, I cried myself to sleep last night. And I never comment on social media, but I wanted to say, when was the last time that you cried yourself to sleep about orphans and widows in distress? When was the last time you cried yourself to sleep about those boys and girls caught in sex trafficking? When was the last time you cried yourself to sleep over the lost that don't know Jesus? Over an election? Who you worship, you trust. And so let me ask you again, who do you put your trust in? What do you put your trust in? Because in this world, worship is war. What we put our trust in is the way in which we fight, regardless of what happens, regardless if we get our way or we don't. Our worship never changes. Because we don't worship God for what we get. We worship God because of who he is. And the truth of the matter is this: worship is directly connected to identity, because who you worship, you become, you begin to look like. In February of 2015, this militant group known as ISIS paraded 21 Egyptian Christians onto the banks of Libya. And they videoed the whole thing to send to the Western world that bowed their knees to Jesus. And in this moment, as they began chanting songs in worship of their God, one by one, each of the 21 Christians were beheaded. And it wasn't quick beheading. The image and the videos were deeply disturbing because it was a sawing. And it was in a different language, so it was hard to understand. But they came across two young men who, as they were cutting their heads off, they were screaming something out in their native tongue. On another video that I found, it was actually a radio station where a caller called in and said, "Those two men that you're talking about were my brothers, both of them. I had two brothers that were killed that day." They said, and what they were crying out was something that our family always repeats to ourselves, that Jesus is our Savior, Jesus is our King. Listen, sometimes the faithful are not saved from the furnace. And sometimes they are. But regardless of where you find yourself, you're still able to fight in the battle. Because the battle's not won. The battle is not measured based off of whether or not you live or you die. The battle is won based off of where you decide to put your trust. Because worship is war. Nebuchadnezzar knew that. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew that. My question for us today in the church is this: do we know that? That worship is war. And if it's true that who we worship, we become, we look like, then the body of Christ should continually look more like the crucified King. And it might be one of those moments where we take a long look in the mirror and ask ourselves the question, what do I look like? The God of Nebuchadnezzar or the God of the cross?
What do you think? Yeah, at Columbine.
Yeah. What did we do?
Mhm.
Situation. You really have to look inside yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's a situation where it wasn't rescued from the fiery furnace.
And she didn't have, I mean, obviously you don't have time to think. You respond.
Mm-hmm. And that would be one of those things where we could be wise to already have decided in our minds what we're going to do. If this, then that. If this happens, then that happens. You know, already have it. It's like training. It's automatic. Just
Or my head cut off, that would be okay.
yeah,
But if it was one of my grandchildren.
yeah, yeah. And the despots and the ones that try to coerce people into doing things, that's a point of weakness that they use. They go after the loved ones, the families, and yeah, that is.
The whole thing even goes back to when we give our heart to the Lord. Nobody takes that away. God says, I'm a jealous God, and no one takes them out of my hand. And so his strength is pulling us along. It's the same thing when we have different things that happens to our bodies. If God already knows what we've got, but he wants us to turn it over to him and let him take care of it, because that's what he can do. Put our hand in his hand. You know that one song I like, put the hand in the hand of the man from Galilee and hang on. And he doesn't hang on, he hangs on to you. He's holding you from the day of salvation.
Mhm.
He's a steadfast thing in your life.
And it may be quite a ride,
You bet.
but you hang on.
No matter, he's with us and with the ride. And,
I was looking at, when we are faced with, or recognize the idolatry in ourselves, or it's confronting us, is what we do. And I found 4 verses that we can either flee, we can avoid it, we can stay away from it and focus on Jesus, or do all 4. I guess is do all 4. Somebody look up 1 Corinthians 10:14. Let's look at those verses. It's a short passage, and y'all are gonna beat me.
Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men. You judge what I say. Is that right?
That's it. Yeah, flee from it. So flee from it. Avoid it. Go down there, look at 20. Is that right?
Verse 20.
Yeah, verse.
No, but I say that these things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to become sharers in demons.
Okay, so avoid that, stay away from it, don't share in it. And 1 John 5:21.
Little children, guard yourselves from idols.
Yeah, little children, guard yourself, keep yourself from idols, stay away from them. And then Hebrews 12:2.
Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God.
We can't go wrong if we keep our eyes on Jesus. If we've got our eyes focused on him, we can't. It's when we get distracted by those shiny objects, those things that are out there that are trying to get our attention away from him, that we make a mistake. You notice the pictures I pulled up. These are some of the 3 of them anyway from the opening ceremonies at the Olympics, which was an abomination. Hopefully the closing ceremonies don't repeat that mess. So just some questions for thought on there. Can you think of some other biblical examples of where persons, faithful people, have continued worship of God in a difficult situation? I mean, you could.
Think about the people with the floods and the tornadoes and all the hurricanes and fires that are losing everything that they had. How does that feel? You know, how many of them still trust God through it all, that it was his plan? We don't understand why though.
Yeah. Yeah, and like what Job said, Lord gives and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the Lord. You know, he lost his family, lost his possessions, all his herds and everything. He still, I was thinking of David when he was on the run. We studied that in Samuel when he was on the run from Saul, and many of the Psalms that were written by David were written at times when he was really in difficult situations, where some of the great praises in Psalms were written at those times by him. Or I was thinking of Stephen as he was being stoned, keeping his eyes on Jesus. I mean, he'd go through, there's just example after example in the Bible of ones that kept their eyes on the Lord.
He's the one that paid the ultimate price for all our problems. He put his body on, allowed the people to put him on the cross. And if you could read in the Bible of all the torment that they do to him, put him on the cross, drive nails through their hands. And then Jesus, they stuck him in the side and he bled out. He was dead. They put him in a tomb. And then, he was alive. He come out of there all okay.
Yeah.
And so all we have to do is when things get tough here, is to remember who paid the price. How much did he love me? How much does he still love me?
Mm-hmm.
And he's the one that's hanging on.
But I've thought more and more about this statement of how we worship God for who he is, not for what we get or what he does for us. And that, as I think about that, really is very meaningful to me. I mean, think about it, because I fall into the trap of going down my I want list and say, Lord, what'd he say? Cosmic Santa Claus? That's what we got to watch out for. I think I did watch out for thinking God is the cosmic Santa Claus, but we worship him. And if we just think about who he is, I mean, my goodness, we just can't help but worship, thinking how great he is.
I think Nebuchadnezzar made that statue to look like him. It doesn't say that anywhere, does it?
I bet it did. No, it doesn't. It doesn't, but I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, he hired a guy to, he may have been posing for the sculptor, It's just, yeah, yeah. A great narcissist.
Yeah. Daniel, the one with the golden head and the bronze and all that. And then I wondered if he made an image to look like that.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And I think he did. I mean, the image was more, despite everything that dream said, that my kingdom is going to come to an end, it's not going to happen. I'm going to have a kingdom. It's going to be gold from head to toe. It's going to be, none of this silver stuff, none of this bronze stuff and iron. It's all going to be gold. It's me. That's Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, I'll bet it looked like him. Yeah.
God knows what we're thinking before we say it. So he's already in the plan, in the deal, and he's in the plan. And he knows where we're going, what diseases we have, and what the problems are. And all he wants us to do is to show our love towards him and to keep him, our hand in his hand, and let him solve the problem for us.
Mm-hmm.
We can't solve our problems. For physical problems that happen to us, heart attacks and all that, we can't solve that. He can. He has the power.
And he can help us.
Look back a lot of times. I said, oh, in awe, he did this for me. And I didn't really realize what happened in the past. And he's with you all the time. So he does know what we're going through and what's happening. He's, like they said, he's the awesome God.
Yeah.
He's not just some person. He's the awesome God that knows everything.
Yeah. This last question, and Pastor Jeff posted on Facebook a week or so ago a little clip that had John MacArthur talking about, and I guess the topic was worship songs, and I'm not getting into this music battle at all, but I don't know, any of y'all see that? Pastor Jeff posted there anyway. And John MacArthur's point on songs and hymns is most of the hymns, many of the hymns have a deep doctrinal message in them. And he looks at that as being good worship, in that we are focusing on who God is and what he is and how we worship him. And it is a more worshipful experience in John MacArthur's eye than repeating 7 words 10 times. And but anyway, and I dipped my toe into that little music battle, but but anyway, it is the point, I think, and the thing I really want to make on that is that we really, when we are seeking to know who God is, that's worship. When we are worshiping who he is and wanting to know more about him, that's what when we worship something, that's what we really want to learn all about it. And that's okay.
John MacArthur, I had a radio in my truck today when I was driving every day. It's turned on that station, and I listened to him. He's an awesome preacher.
Uh-huh.
He really.
So I think the 3 words sometimes to pick out of this is the same verse I picked out last week, Daniel 3:18. But if not, those 3 words. But if not, it's the 3 guys said to King Nebuchadnezzar, but if not. So they were going to worship God, whether he saved them or not. So, but if God. So there's a lot of times in the Bible it says, but God, and it changes everything. But if not, you were going to say something?
I think of in prayer, one of the prayer mnemonic type things is acts, adoration, confession, confession, thanksgiving. But anyway, starting with adoration, and many of my prayers will start with a praise, but I find that it immediately goes with thanksgiving, because our thanksgiving comes because of who God is. I mean, we reap the benefit of the characteristics of God, whether we live, die, whatever. I mean, however things turn out, God's attributes, we can't help but we reap the benefits of who he is. And I don't think we can separate praise and thanksgiving because they're so intertwined. I mean, he is who he is, regardless of what happens to us. But still, even in what happens to us, there's still the thanksgiving, because his other attributes of peace and the spiritual attributes, are, whether they're physical or not, we receive his kindness, his presence, his peace. We reap those benefits.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, next week we'll go to Daniel 4, and we find Nebuchadnezzar has another dream. It's about a tree, and there's Elvis is in the tree. No, anyway, so this is interesting. Nebuchadnezzar, man, I keep having these weird dreams. So we'll look at that, and so do that. So I think with that, any other thoughts? Yeah, Shane Wood. Yeah. When I was looking for something, that when I first saw him, I'm thinking, that's right. That's right. Then I started listening to what he said. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Dee, would you close?
Father, again, we come to you with thanksgiving for who you are, for your love and your kindness towards us. We come acknowledging you, our God. Lord, we fall short in many ways. And we need you. We come confessing that we do set up idols. Be it our health, be it our possessions, and not necessarily intentionally setting them up, but we start fretting over things. And we start worrying about different things when our focus needs to be on you and we thank you that no matter how many times we fall, we can come back to you and you receive. Go with us now through the next hour with the worship service, and Lord, may our worship be acceptable to you, and may we leave with you and following in your steps. It's in your name we do pray.
Amen. All right. All right. Everybody have a super week.
I'm still trying to come up with this.
Oh, see y'all.
Golf.
Have a great week, everybody.
Go.